Stay unbothered, not because the world has suddenly become gentle, not because circumstances have learned kindness, but because you have discovered something far more powerful than reaction. You have discovered that your inner state is the command center of reality, and that nothing outside you has authority unless you grant it permission. The moment you understand this, life begins to rearrange itself in ways that feel miraculous, effortless, and inevitable. Most people believe life changes when conditions improve. They wait for reassurance, validation, stability, or signs before they relax. But the deeper truth is this: life improves the moment you relax first. The moment you withdraw your emotional dependence on appearances, you step into a position of silent power. You no longer chase outcomes. You allow outcomes to chase you. To stay unbothered does not mean you are indifferent or cold. It means you are anchored. It means your peace is no longer for sale. It means your reactions are no longer automatic responses trained by old assumptions. You begin to move from a place of inner certainty rather than emotional reflex. And when that happens, the world takes notice. Every disturbance you experience is not caused by the event itself, but by the meaning you assign to it. Two people can face the same situation, and one collapses while the other remains composed. The difference is not strength, intelligence, or luck. The difference is assumption. One assumes the situation has power over them. The other assumes they are the source from which all power flows. When you remain unbothered, you are silently declaring, "This does not define me. This does not determine my future. This does not disturb my inner knowing." That declaration does not need words. It is felt. And what is felt impresses itself upon reality. Life responds to emotional authority, not emotional noise. The louder your inner stillness, the faster things align. Most people spend their lives emotionally negotiating with the world. They become upset so they can be heard. They worry so they can prepare. They react so they can feel in control. But all of this effort actually reinforces the assumption that life is happening to them rather than through them. The unbothered individual understands something different. They understand that attention is creative, that emotion is a command, that sustained inner states become facts, and so they choose carefully what they feel, not because they are suppressing emotion, but because they are directing it. When something unexpected occurs, they do not immediately interpret it as failure or delay. They pause. They remain inwardly neutral. They refuse to rush into meaning. And in that pause, reality reshapes itself. This is where miracles are born. Not in desperation, not in force, but in composure. A miracle is simply a shift in assumption that collapses time. It is what happens when you stop insisting on proof and begin resting in knowing. When you stay unbothered, you are no longer arguing with the present moment. You are no longer emotionally reinforcing what you do not want. You are quietly occupying the state of already being fulfilled. And the world, having no choice but to mirror that state, rearranges itself accordingly. Consider how often reactions delay outcomes. Anxiety keeps things stuck. Overthinking keeps doors closed. Emotional turbulence keeps you circling the same patterns. But calm expectation moves things effortlessly. Quiet confidence invites cooperation. Inner neutrality dissolves resistance. Staying unbothered is not passive. It is the most active form of inner discipline. It requires you to trust your assumption more than your senses. It requires you to believe that what you've accepted inwardly is already set in motion, regardless of what today looks like. This is why those who remain calm often receive sudden breakthroughs. Opportunities appear without struggle. People change without confrontation. Problems resolve themselves without explanation. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels natural, because once you stop reacting, you stop feeding the old story. The world is always echoing your inner conversations. When your inner dialogue shifts from "why is this happening" to "this is working out," you change the direction of that echo. When you stop emotionally wrestling with circumstances, you withdraw energy from them, and what is not energized cannot persist. Staying unbothered means you no longer panic when things are quiet. You no longer doubt when progress is invisible. You understand that unseen movement is still movement. Roots grow in silence. Seeds break open underground. The greatest transformations occur long before they are visible. So you remain composed. You do not chase signs. You do not ask repeatedly when it will happen. You do not mentally rehearse failure, you assume fulfillment, and you live from that assumption now. This is where miracles accelerate, when your inner world no longer contradicts your desire. Most people unknowingly cancel their own intentions by reacting to temporary appearances. They affirm peace but emotionally rehearse chaos. They visualize success but respond to delays with frustration. The unbothered individual does not do this. They understand that consistency of state is more important than intensity of effort. They choose calm again and again. They choose faith again and again. They choose inner stillness, even when emotions attempt to rise. And because of this consistency, reality stabilizes around them. When you stay unbothered, people begin to treat you differently. Company, conversations shift. Respect increases. Tension dissolves. This is not because you demanded it, but because your inner state communicates authority without effort. Calm is persuasive. Composure is magnetic. The world responds to who you are being, not what you are asking for. Miracles often arrive disguised as normal events. A casual conversation leads to an unexpected opportunity. A delay prevents a mistake. A closed door redirects you to something greater. The unbothered individual recognizes these moments not as coincidences, but as confirmations, because when you are no longer emotionally desperate, you can finally see clearly. Staying unbothered also means releasing the need to control how things unfold. Control is rooted in fear. Trust is rooted in knowing. When you trust your inner assumption, you allow life to surprise you, and life loves to surprise those who do not micromanage outcomes. This does not mean you do nothing, it means you act from alignment rather than urgency. You move when inspired, not when pressured. You speak when centered, not when reactive. Your actions become precise, effective, and timely, and suddenly effort decreases while results increase. This is the paradox. The less you emotionally interfere, the faster things resolve. The more you remain inwardly settled, the more the outer world rearranges itself smoothly. Miracles are not violations of natural law. They are expressions of a higher order of law, one that responds to assumption rather than effort, to consciousness rather than force. When you stay unbothered, you are no longer impressed by the world, you impress upon it. You stop asking, what if it doesn't work? And begin living as if it already has, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, naturally, calmly, and that calmness becomes the instruction reality follows. There will be moments when the old habit of reaction tries to return, when the mind wants to analyze, when emotions want to surge. In those moments, you do not fight yourself. You simply return to center. You remember who you are. You remember that nothing external has the power to disturb your inner knowing unless you allow it. Each time you choose stillness, you strengthen it. Over time, staying unbothered becomes your default state. And from that state, life unfolds with a kind of elegance that feels almost unreal. Problems no longer feel personal. Delays no longer feel threatening. Challenges no longer feel permanent. You understand that everything is temporary except the state you occupy. So you occupy the state of fulfillment now. You walk as if supported. You speak as if heard. You decide as if guided. You rest as if secure. And life, responding faithfully, confirms your assumption again and again. This is the miracle, not that circumstances change, but that they change because you did not. When you remain unmoved, life moves for you. When you stay unbothered, reality reorganizes itself around your calm authority. Whoa. And you trust the unseen, the seen must follow. And one day you will look back and realize that the moment everything shifted was not when you tried harder, but when you finally relaxed into knowing, you stayed unbothered, and miracles happened. And even now, as you listen to these words, something within you already understands this truth, not as a theory, not as motivation, but as recognition. There is a quiet familiarity in the idea of remaining unbothered, as though you have known all along that peace was never meant to be earned through struggle, but claimed through awareness. Because deep down, you know that the moment you stop arguing with life, life stops arguing with you. Most disturbances are not warnings, they are tests of assumption. They appear to see whether you will return to the old identity that reacts, doubts, and resists, or whether you will remain faithful to the inner state you have chosen. Every moment gives you this choice, and every time you choose calm over chaos, you reinforce a new self-concept, one that does not bend under pressure. When you remain unbothered during uncertainty, you are not ignoring reality, you are redefining it. You are declaring that your inner world is the reference point, not external fluctuations. And reality, being obedient, must recalibrate itself around that reference point. This is why emotional mastery is not about suppression, but about selection. You select which thoughts deserve belief. You select which emotions deserve attention. You select which interpretations deserve energy. And what you select repeatedly becomes automatic. Soon you no longer need to remind yourself to stay calm. Calm becomes who you are, and when calm becomes your identity, urgency dissolves, fear loses its grip, impatience fades. You no longer rush manifestations because you are no longer separate from them. You are living from the end internally, and the external world is simply catching up. Notice how different life feels when you stop watching it nervously, when you stop checking for confirmation, when you stop measuring progress every hour. In that space, things begin to move unexpectedly fast. People respond differently. Situations soften. Paths open. Not because you demanded it, but because you allowed it. The unbothered state carries an assumption of inevitability. It says, "This is already done. I am not waiting for proof." And that assumption is powerful because it is relaxed. It does not strain. It does not insist. It simply is. Strain delays. Relaxation accelerates. This is why forcing positivity never works, but quiet knowing always does. The world does not respond to affirmations repeated in tension, it responds to inner conviction felt in stillness. When you are truly unbothered, there is no inner argument left to resolve. And without inner resistance, outer resistance collapses. There may be moments when circumstances seem to contradict your assumption. In those moments, the old versi on of you would panic, analyze, or emotionally engage. But now you understand that contradiction is not denial, it is transition. Reality must rearrange itself, and rearrangement can look messy before it looks miraculous. So you remain steady. You understand that bridges of events are not always comfortable, but they are always purposeful, and you do not need to see the full bridge to walk it. You only need to remain faithful to the state you have chosen. Staying unbothered means you no longer take appearances personally. You no longer interpret delays as rejection or silence as failure. You understand that movement does not require your emotional supervision. Life knows what it is doing when you stop interfering. And so you allow people to be who they are without internal reaction. You allow situations to unfold without inner commentary. You allow time to pass without impatience. This allowance is not weakness, it is authority. It is the confidence of someone who knows that nothing valuable can miss them. When you embody this knowing, you stop chasing outcomes and start attracting confirmations. Small shifts begin to happen. A problem resolves without effort. A conversation goes better than expected. An opportunity appears from an unlikely place. These are not accidents. They are reflections of the calm certainty you have sustained. And the more you notice them, the more natural they become. You realize then that miracles were never rare. You were just too emotional. Why involved to allow them, too tense to notice, too reactive to receive. But now staying unbothered has cleared the channel. You are no longer trying to prove your worth to life. You are no longer convincing yourself that things will work out. You simply assume they do, and that assumption quietly governs everything. This is how the inner state becomes destiny, not through effort, not through struggle, but through consistent emotional posture. And you hold that posture even when no one is watching, especially then, because what you feel in private determines what appears in public. What you assume in silence shapes what manifests in form. And when your silence is calm, your world becomes cooperative. So you continue, moment by moment, choosing composure, choosing trust, choosing inner stillness over mental noise, not as a technique, but as a way of being, and life, always listening, continues to respond. And as this way of being settles into you, you begin to notice something subtle yet profound. Your inner world no longer rises and falls with external events. You experience emotions, yes, but they pass through you instead of pulling you into reaction. You observe thoughts without immediately believing them. You witness situations without rushing to label them good or bad. This space between stimulus and response becomes your greatest power. In that space, choice is born. You choose not to panic when answers are delayed. You choose not to explain yourself when silent. C would speak louder. You choose not to defend your worth when you already feel secure within it. These choices may seem small, but they shift the entire structure of your reality, because the world is not responding to what happens to you, it is responding to how you interpret what happens. When you remain unbothered, you are quietly telling life, I trust the process because I trust myself. And trust is magnetic. Trust invites alignment. Trust allows unseen forces to coordinate without resistance. You begin to sense that things are being handled even when you are not thinking about them, that outcomes are moving toward you, even when you are resting, that solutions are forming without your mental involvement. This realization brings a deep sense of ease, not the ease of indifference, but the ease of confidence. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You stop emotionally visiting futures you do not want. You understand that imagination is creative, and you no longer misuse it against yourself. Instead, your imagination becomes quiet, settled, assured. You imagine from fulfillment, not from longing, from stability, not from fear, from certainty, not from hope. And because imagination is the blueprint, reality has no option but to follow the design you consistently return to. Staying unbothered also changes how you relate to people. You no longer seek reactions to validate your presence. You no longer need agreement to feel secure. You listen more, speak less, and what? And you do speak, your words carry weight. Not because they are forceful, but because they are calm. People feel this. They may not understand it, but they respond to it. Conversations become smoother. Conflict dissolves before it escalates. Even when others are emotionally charged, your stillness remains untouched, and that stillness becomes the dominant energy in the room. This is how leadership forms naturally, not through assertion, but through inner regulation. You realize that remaining unbothered is not something you do occasionally, it is something you practice until it becomes instinctive. At first, you may catch yourself reacting and gently bring yourself back. Over time, the gap between reaction and awareness widens, and awareness begins to lead. And with awareness leading, miracles no longer feel dramatic. They feel expected. You start to trust timing. You stop forcing answers. You stop mentally pushing doors that are meant to open effortlessly. When something does not move, you do not take it as resistance. You take it as redirection or preparation. And because you are not emotionally disturbed, you can sense which is which. This clarity is one of the greatest gifts of staying unbothered. You no longer confuse urgency with importance. You no longer mistake noise for movement. You understand that the most powerful shifts happen quietly, internally, before they ever appear externally. So you continue living your life, fulfilling your responsibilities, engage in G with the world, but from a different center, a steadier one, a calmer one. You are present without being consumed, focused without being tense, involved without being entangled. And life responds to this balance with precision. Opportunities arrive when you are not searching. Answers appear when you stop asking repeatedly. People reach out just when you had released the need to hear from them. Situations resolve themselves in ways you could not have planned, not because you tried harder, but because you interfered less. The unbothered state removes friction, and without friction, movement is natural. You begin to see that many of the struggles you once faced were not obstacles, but reflections of inner resistance. And now that resistance has softened, the path feels smoother, not because life is easier, but because you are steadier, and this steadiness becomes your new normal. You wake up calmer. You move through the day with less mental noise. You fall asleep without replaying conversations or worrying about tomorrow. Your nervous system learns that it is safe to relax, because you are no longer interpreting every uncertainty as a threat. And from this relaxed state, creation flows. You no longer rush miracles. You allow them. You no longer seek signs. You recognize alignment. You no longer doubt your path. You walk it, and step by step, moment by moment, the unbothered state continues to deepen, shaping your reality from the inside out. And as this depth becomes familiar, you start to recognize how much energy was once wasted on resistance. You see clearly now that most exhaustion never came from action, but from inner opposition. arguing with what is, fearing what might be, replaying what has already passed. Remaining unbothered releases you from that cycle. Your energy returns, your focus sharpens, your presence becomes grounded. You begin to feel guided rather than pressured. Decisions no longer feel heavy. You sense the next step without forcing clarity. When something is not meant for you, you feel no loss. When something is meant for you, you feel no rush. There is a quiet assurance that nothing valuable requires panic, and nothing true requires chasing. This assurance changes how you move through time. You stop living in anticipation or regret and start inhabiting the moment fully. And it is from this full presence that reality responds most fluidly. Because the present moment is the only place where creation happens. Staying unbothered anchors you here, not distracted by imagined futures, not weighed down by remembered pasts, just here, aware, steady, receptive. From this position you notice opportunities that were always present but once invisible to a restless mind. You also notice that your reactions were once teaching life how to treat you. Each time you rushed, life mirrored urgency. Each time you doubted, life reflected delay. Each time you emotionally collapsed, life reinforced instability. Now, as your reactions soften, life adjusts its tone. It becomes calmer with you. This does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges lose their power to disturb your center. You experience them without absorbing them. You address them without identifying with them. You move through them without internalizing them. And because you do not internalize them, they pass. You begin to trust that whatever arises is temporary unless you emotionally attach to it. This understanding frees you. You no longer cling to highs or fear lows. You remain balanced, knowing that balance itself is what sustains progress. There is a maturity in this state, a grounded confidence that does not need to announce itself. You stop explaining your peace. You stop defending your calm. You let it speak for itself. And it does. Others may wonder how you remain composed, how you do not react the way they expect, how you stay steady when outcomes are uncertain. You do not try to convince them. You simply remain who you are, because inner authority does not argue. You also notice that time seems to respond differently now. What once felt slow begins to accelerate. What once felt blocked begins to loosen. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently, smoothly, naturally. This is because time bends to assumption, and your assumption is no longer I am waiting, but it is unfolding. So you continue living from that knowing, not checking, not forcing, not questioning, just being. You understand that the unbothered state is not the absence of desire, but the absence of desperation. You still have intentions, you still have visions, but they are held lightly, confidently, without emotional strain. And because they are held this way, they are free to materialize. You no longer confuse effort with effectiveness. You act when inspired, rest when guided, and trust that both action and rest are equally productive when they arise from alignment. There is a rhythm to life you begin to feel, a rhythm that was always there but drowned out by mental noise. Staying unbothered tunes you into it. You move with it rather than against it, and moving with it feels effortless. You realize now that miracles are not sudden interruptions of reality, but natural outcomes of inner consistency. They feel surprising only to the mind that once lived in resistance. To the calm mind, they feel like confirmation. So you remain faithful to this state, not perfectly, but persistently. When old reactions surface, you notice them without judgment and return to stillness. Each return strengthens the habit. Each moment of composure reinforces your new identity. And that identity continues to shape what unfolds next. And this identity begins to feel more real than any temporary circumstance. You trust it, you lean into it, you stop asking whether it will last, because it already feels permanent. The unbothered state is no longer something you reach for in moments of stress, it is the ground you stand on. From this ground, perception itself changes. You notice that situations which once felt overwhelming now feel manageable, even ordinary. Not because they have lost significance, but because you have gained perspective. You see events as passing waves rather than defining forces. You let them rise, crest, and fall without needing to interfere. This ability to let things pass is what gives them no power to linger. You also become aware of how little explanation life actually requires. You do not need to understand every delay, justify every turn, or rationalize every outcome. You are comfortable not knowing because you trust the direction even when the details are hidden. And in that comfort, anxiety dissolves. You no longer rush to label moments as success or failure. You allow them to be what they are, movements in a larger unfolding. This neutrality keeps you open, it keeps you flexible, it keeps you receptive to better outcomes than you could have imagined. When you are unbothered, you do not cling to specific forms. You care about the state, not the shape. And because of this, life is free to surprise you. You begin to sense when something is aligning before it becomes visible. There is a subtle inner signal, a quiet assurance that tells you things are in motion. You do not announce it. You do not seek validation for it. You simply recognize it and continue on. This inner recognition replaces external confirmation. You also notice how silence becomes nourishing. You no longer feel compelled to fill space with thought or emotion. Silence becomes a place of restoration rather than emptiness. In silence, you feel connected rather than alone. This is where the deepest shifts occur, because when the mind quiets, assumption speaks clearly, and what assumption accepts, reality executes. So you accept ease, you accept resolution, you accept fulfillment, not as something that will come later, but as something that already exists at the level that matters most. And because you are no longer emotionally reaching for it, it begins to reach for you. Days unfold with a sense of quiet coherence. You meet the right people at the right moments. You say the right thing without rehearsal. You find yourself in the right place without effort. These moments feel natural, almost subtle, yet unmistakably aligned. They stack upon one another. You begin to trust this stacking. You see how one calm decision leads to another, how one moment of restraint prevents unnecessary complication, how one choice to remain centered keeps an entire chain of events harmonious. And you realize that staying unbothered is not about avoiding life. It is about meeting it from a position of inner agreement. You agree with life by trusting it. You cooperate with it by not resisting it. And life, sensing this cooperation, responds with grace. Even when uncertainty arises, it no longer feels threatening. It feels open. It feels full of possibility rather than danger. You remain curious instead of fearful, attentive instead of reactive. This curiosity keeps you present, and presence keeps you aligned. So you continue, breathing, moving, responding without strain. You allow emotions to pass without building stories around them. You allow thoughts to arise without surrendering to them. You allow events to unfold without rushing their meaning. This allowing becomes your strength, and as it deepens, reality continues to shape itself around the calm certainty you quietly sustain. So let this be the truth you leave with today, not as inspiration, but as instruction. The moment you stop being emotionally moved by appearances, life begins to move on your behalf. Not because you begged, forced, or struggled, but because you finally stood still inside yourself. Staying unbothered is not avoidance, it is mastery. It is the quiet decision to trust your inner knowing more than temporary evidence, to rest in certainty rather than chase reassurance. When you no longer give your peace to circumstances, circumstances reorganize themselves around your peace. This is where effort ends and alignment begins. This is where waiting dissolves into knowing. This is where miracles stop being rare events and become natural outcomes. Remain calm, remain steady, remain inwardly fulfilled, and watch how reality, with absolute obedience, apes itself to match the state you have chosen to live from.